I give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to address you on this historic day, the day when, right before this statement, the flag representing the new Syria, the Syria of freedom and dignity, was raised on the flagpole of the United Nations alongside 193 of our partners in the international community. My warmest congratulations to all Syrians on this historic moment. This flag is not a mere symbol, but rather a proclamation of a new existence that is born out of suffering, embodying a future that emerges from resilience and a promise of change after years of pain. Mr. President, this day came only after great sacrifices, after a march of blood and tears. Hundreds of thousands have been killed and disappeared without a trace in the prisons of the Assad regime. This day is theirs as it is ours. We will never forget them, and we will continue to work tirelessly to achieve peace and justice for them, for their loved ones, and for everyone who dreamt of such a day. For decades, the story of Syria has been associated with the cruelty of the Assad regime. The father and the son, under their repressive rule, the country plunged into darkness and citizens were killed, tortured, and systematically disappeared. Chemical weapons have been used. Millions have been displaced. And generations have been broken under the weight of pain and loss. The regime's actions have not only caused profound humanitarian tragedies for the Syrian people, but have allowed destabilizing forces to sprout on our soil. Under Assad's rule, our land became a hotbed of drug production and a haven for foreign militias and terrorist organizations, which found a foothold in our country, thus exacerbating our suffering and the suffering of the entire region. The brutal policies of that era deepened divisions, forcing entire families to immigrate, leaving behind their homes and dreams that were reduced to ashes. However, I'm here today to represent the new Syria. Mr. President, after the fall of the Assad regime and in a remarkably short period of time, less than 4.5 months, that came after 14 years of Assad's war on his people and 54 years of repression. After all of that, Syria is finally catching its breath. Syria has opened its doors to the world. Presidents, foreign ministers, and international figures arrived in Syria. Syrians everywhere in the diaspora are now exploring the possibility of returning home, hoping to contribute to Syria's reconstruction. For the first time, major international organizations and United Nations human rights institutions have been granted genuine access to our territory, tangible access, something that the former regime has repeatedly rejected in the past. The era of systematic bloodshed, arbitrary arrests, forced disappearances, and impunity is over. Airplanes are now dropping flowers instead of barrel bombs, as you saw on the anniversary of the Revolution Day weeks ago. The export of drugs which threatened our region was decisively addressed through the tremendous efforts of our security services, who are also relentlessly combating the terrorist organization ISIL-Daesh. We are in coordination and we are always ready with the countries in the region and the world to face these threats. On the chemical weapons file, a dark mark in the history of the Assad regime and in the impotence of the international community, our constructive cooperation with the OPCW on the ground shows that our actions are in line with our words. We also coordinate consistently with relevant countries, and we ask for increased support in this regard. In these 4 past months, Mr. President, and through unprecedented cooperation among them, Syrians, men and women, have achieved the impossible. The caretaker government has preserved state institutions, preventing them from collapsing. Today, we have successfully integrated Syrian competencies, skills, and diversity into a transitional government, which was unanimously welcomed in the UN Human Rights Council resolution last month. We also united the military factions, thus ending the era of factionalism. With the dissolution of all of these factions without exception, we initiated constitutional steps towards real reform. We launched a national dialogue in which, for the first time, nearly 1,000 Syrians met at the presidential place to discuss issues affecting Syria's future. In the wake of the tragic events in the Syrian coastal areas last March, where regime affiliates attempted to ignite a civil war by committing horrific massacres against a large number of security personnel and civilians, and we are still under these attacks, subject to these attacks until yesterday, with the aim of provoking sectarian responses. Yet we established a civil peace committee and a fact-finding committee to hold perpetrators accountable. In line with the recommendations of the Security Council, we also sent humanitarian aid to civilians in the Hamimim air base, and we are ready to fulfill all our commitments so that they can return to their homes soon. Soon we will also announce a Transitional Justice Commission, a commission for missing persons, and we are also ready to coordinate with the US to also search for the missing Americans in Syria. We will also announce genuine steps towards a national parliament that represents the Syrian people. Syria today is for all Syrians, for those who were silenced under Assad's rule and now express their opinions freely, for Syrians who have been displaced from their homes, who can now return to these homes. In these 4 months, Muslims in Syria celebrated Eid al-Fitr. Christians celebrated Easter in their churches peacefully, and some Syrian Jews returned home for the first time and visited their synagogues. For the first time, there was a Kurdish leader in Damascus, through the mediation of the US, with paving the way with the President of the Republic towards a Syria that respects its ethnic and cultural mosaic, a principle that we explicitly enshrined in our constitutional declaration, new constitutional declaration. Mr. President, yes, Syria is diverse, but it is not divided into majority and minorities, but rather is the country of all Syrians, strong, optimistic Syrians who work together to build a future that we were once deprived of and that is now here before us, possible and achievable. Yet, while we enter this new era, the challenges are huge and remain a threat to us and to you. We have reiterated that Syrians are equal before the law in terms of rights and responsibilities, regardless of their religious or ethnic background. While Syria has opened its doors to states and gave hope to its people to return, the burden of sanctions continue to threaten our stability. When international organizations and corporations seek to invest in and rebuild our economy, they find that these sanctions that have expired stand in the way. These restrictive measures imposed against the previous regime prevent capital and expertise from entering our country while allowing illicit networks to flourish. In fact, Mr. President, it seems that those who benefit from operating in the shadows and covertly, often associated with extremist or terrorist organizations, are the ones who really benefit from the continuation of these sanctions. It also reinforces extremist narratives that oppose international openness, intimidate investments, and leave Syrians who want to return unable to do so, and make those who remain in Syria unsure of the prospects for their lives in their country. Those who demand more from Syria are the same ones who insist on maintaining many sanctions imposed against it. These sanctions force Syria to play the role of an aid-dependent country rather than being a partner in global economic growth. They also prevent the smooth functioning of international and civil society organizations and constrain our ability to implement transitional justice and ensure and guarantee security. Mr. President, the lifting of sanctions could be a crucial step in transforming Syria from a country known for its dark past to an active and powerful partner in peace, prosperity, and the international economy. The stability of Syria does not only affect us as Syrians, but also the stability of the entire region. Here I must refer to another destabilizing factor, which is the Israeli strikes on Syrian territory. These actions are not only a flagrant violation of international law and Syria's sovereignty, but also a direct threat to regional stability. The ongoing aggression destabilizes our reconstruction efforts and undermines the peace and security we seek to achieve. Mr. President, we would like to ask the Council to make pressure on Israel to withdraw from Syria and to implement the 1974 disengagement agreement. We have repeatedly announced our commitment that Syria will not constitute any threat to any of the neighboring countries or any country around the world, including to Israel. Mr. President, I express my sincere thanks to the governments that have stood with us over the years and to those that have taken steps in recent months to stand with the proud Syrian people. We appreciate the countries that have begun to lift sanctions and reopen their embassies and those that are aware of what is at stake for Syria's success or failure. Ladies and gentlemen, let us seize this defining moment, this Council and the international community as a whole. Has an opportunity to support Syria's future. Syrians are ready to reshape the future of their country and to set a new paradigm for what a successful post-conflict transition looks like anywhere in the world. We hope that you will be our partners in this path. Thank you very much.
Je remercie.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Shaibani for his statement. And once again, welcome, Mr. Shaibani. And now I'll give the floor to the permanent representative of Libya.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I deliver my statement on behalf of the Arab Group, I would like to welcome His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Asad Shibani, and in my personal or national capacity, I would like to express the sincere congratulations of Libya, government and people for your achievements, raising the new flag of Syria despite all sacrifices and challenges facing Syria. Mr. President, Syria and the Syrian people are going through a very critical, momentous moment following years of pain and sacrifice. We have a chance today to build a bright future, a more stable future for Syria. We are before an opportunity for a future that guarantees for all Syrians a decent life with security, justice, and equality in a unified sovereign state. A state that can preserve and maintain its stability and territorial integrity, meeting the needs of its people without any foreign destructive interference. In this vein, the Arab Group once again reiterates the importance of supporting all sincere national efforts that are underpinned on an inclusive Syrian dialogue that maintains the unity of Syria, meeting the aspirations of its people and freeing it from this imposed terrorism, paving the way for a comprehensive, sustainable peace that would preserve the safety and security of Syrians following decades of destruction in line with Security Council Resolution 2254. Mr. President, the Arab Group welcomes the establishment of an interim Syrian government, which we perceive as an important step that will strengthen the pillars of a new Syrian government based on inclusive national factors. We categorically reject any attempts at fragmentation or division or imposing a new fait accompli on the Syrians. We stress the need to support all efforts to bring about national peace, rejecting any attempt at foreign interference in their domestic affairs. The unity and territorial integrity of Syria is not open for any negotiation or solutions. We also support Syria's effort to combat terrorism and ISIL, while also working on ending any attempt at supporting it. So, because this is a threat to the peace and security of Syria and the entire region. On the humanitarian track, the Arab group believes that the continued deterioration of the situation requires an effective and urgent action from the international community to move from the stage of relief to the early recovery and development stage. This also applies to the investment in housing, health, education, and energy sectors. This would help to bring about the conducive environment for the decent and voluntary return of refugees and displaced. In line with the development of the interim stage and bringing about the necessary development, we stress the need to lift the economic sanctions imposed on Syria immediately. Such sanctions have no justification, and there is no need for it to remain. It obstructs the interests of the Syrian people and undermines its economy, as well as the aspired for political development. This is an important step to support peace, security, and prosperity in Syria. We stress that we should not negotiate with or blackmail the Syrian people with the sanctions dossier or politicize it, as is the case in other countries. The group call upon international donors to meet their pledges, especially what has been announced in the Brussels conference to support humanitarian effort and ensure the return of migrants and refugees and for the reconstruction. Mr. President, we condemn in the strongest words the continued attacks by the Israeli occupation forces on Syrian territory. This is a flagrant violation of the UN Charter, the international law, and the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement. It also exposes regional security to grave dangers. We call upon the Security Council to take urgent moves to compel the Israeli occupation to stop immediately these violations and respect Syria's sovereignty and ensure the unconditional and immediate withdrawal from Syrian Golan and all other occupied Syrian territories, including the areas where it has recently had incursions, in a clear move that only attempts at using the current developments in Syria and to expand their presence. We call upon the Security Council to take immediate measures to stop these provocative actions that will pull the entire region to the brink. Mr. President, to conclude, the Syrian people who have stood resilient before consecutive disastrous crises deserve a chance for peace, for dignity, for prosperity. We in the Arab group reiterate once again that we will stand beside Syria and its people and will support all national and international effort aimed at putting an end to their suffering and meet their legitimate aspirations for a future that is adequate for this people and its civilization. The security and safety of Syria is paramount to the security and safety of all Arabs. We have to put an end to all negative interference and ensure the respect of Syria's unity and territorial integrity. More importantly, we have to put an end to the double standards which have unfortunately become the main trend in this era. It is high time for the Syrian people to enjoy stability, security, and safety. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Libya for the statement on behalf of the Arab League and his observations in his national capacity. And I give the floor now to the Permanent Representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
The merciful As this is the first time my delegation take the floor in this month, I wish to congratulate France on assuming the presidency of Security Council. I also commend Denmark for its effective leadership and the successful conclusion of its presidency in March. We appreciate Mr. Peterson, Special Envoy, and Ms. Misuya, Assistant Secretary General, for their insightful briefing. We acknowledge the presence of His Excellency Minister Asad Hassan al-Shaybani in today's meeting. In light of the evolving situation in Syria and Arab Republic, I wish to make the following points. First, Iran reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Syrian Arab Republic. We call for the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all foreign forces that are in Syria illegally, ending their occupation as essential for restoring Syrian sovereignty and achieving lasting peace. In this context, the Israeli regime's escalating military aggression against Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity constitutes a blatant violation of international law. The United Nations Charter, relevant Security Council resolution, and the 1974 disengagement agreement, and poses a serious threat to international peace and security. The latest UNDOF reports confirm Israel's illegal incursions into the buffer zone and details the occupying forces' abuses. At the same time, Israeli military forces are entrenching their presence by establishing military outposts and promoting tourism in the occupied areas. It is clear evidence of their expansionist agenda. Israeli objective is the systematic destruction of Syrian infrastructure and the dismantling of its military and defensive capabilities, rendering Syria unable to defend itself against further aggression. The Israeli act of aggression are possible only because of full U.S. political and military support. The United States is directly responsible for Israeli continued violations. The Security Council must act now. Silence only encourage further aggression and impunity, just as we are tragically witnessing in Gaza. Second, as highlighted by the ASG in today's meeting, despite the UN's commendable efforts, Syria is facing a severe humanitarian crisis. Around 16.7 million people, over 70% of population, need aid, the highest level since 2011. More than 7 million individuals are internally displaced, and millions more have sought refuge in neighboring countries. Humanitarian affairs are underfunded. As of March 2025, only 10% of the $1.2 billion needed has been raised. We are deeply concerned about the continued U.S. sanctions on Syria. These sanctions are unjustified. They block reconstruction, hurt the economy, and prevent refugees from returning. They cause suffering for the entire Syrian population. We call for their immediate and unconditional removal. Third, we are deeply saddened by the tragic loss of civilians' life in Latakia and Tartus on 6 March, especially among the Alawite community. We support the Security Council call for an independent and transparent investigation. Syria's interim authorities must ensure accountability and protect all communities in line with the international law. Fourth, Iran stressed the importance of fighting terrorism in Syria, especially from foreign terrorist fighters. These groups remain a serious threat to Syria and the wider region. FTS must be returned to the countries and held accountable under international law. Iran is ready to work with all responsible partners to fight terrorism. Fifth, Iran supports a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process in line with Security Council Resolution 2254. A peaceful solution must include free and fair elections, a national dialogue, and an inclusive government that represents all Syrians. The United Nations must lead this process fairly while respecting Syrian sovereignty. Finally, Iran's position on Syria is clear and consistent. We support a sovereign, stable, and united Syria, free from terrorism, occupation, and foreign interference. Iran has never taken any action to destabilize Syria or the region. Any attempts to distort Iran's position is politically motivated and categorically rejected. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for his statement, and I give the floor to the permanent representative of Turkey. Turkiye.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the beginning, I would like to express our appreciation to Mr. Pedersen and Ms. Musuya for their detailed and informative briefings. I would like to welcome sincerely Foreign Minister Sheybani. His presence here is not only testament to the progress Syria has achieved in such a short period, but also represents the strong commitment of Syria to international engagement. Mr. President, since the fall of the previous regime, Syrian administration has made noteworthy progress. In just 4 months, the administration has achieved what many once deemed unthinkable, namely the successful convening of the National Dialogue Conference, the announcement of the Constitutional Declaration, and the formation of a technocratic transitional government. These milestones mark a clear and promising path toward a Syrian-owned, Syrian-led political transition that aligns with the aspirations of the Syrian people. They also represent critical steps toward a national reconciliation following decades of devastation and repression by the former regime. In the wake of the establishment of the transitional government, we observe growing public support, both within Syria and among diaspora. A recent survey published in the international press reflects this trend. Accordingly, overwhelming majority of the Syrians are optimistic about the future, feel freer, and believe that security situation has improved. However, sustaining this renewed sense of national hope requires not only continued effort by the Syrian authorities, but also concrete support from the international community. Mr. President, reconstruction is essential to achieving lasting peace and stability in Syria. The restoration of vital infrastructure, the provision of uninterrupted public services, and improvement of living conditions must become our shared priorities. We therefore call on the international community to actively support reconstruction efforts and critically to lift sanctions without delay. These measures are urgently needed to restore country's economic viability and social fabric. In this context, we welcome the constructive engagement established between the administration and the international institutions such as the UN bodies, the OPCW, and the IMF. I hope the others will follow. These interactions illustrate a genuine willingness by the Syrian authorities to open a new chapter through transparency and cooperation. We believe that these channels will soon facilitate Syria's reintegration into the global financial system, enable new investments, and strengthen efforts to address humanitarian needs and the accountability mechanisms. Mr. President, we are also encouraged by signs of growing institutional capability within Syria. The government is increasingly able to maintain order, and even in the face of provocations affecting the south, we observe growing understanding between local elements and Damascus. Daesh threat, in varying degrees, is still present in the country, and Syrian administration's efforts to fight terrorism should further be supported by the international community. We prioritize cooperation with regional countries to address shared security threats. As the neighboring countries of Syria, Turkiye, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon are coordinating their efforts to form a regional mechanism to fight Daesh. However, continued and unprovoked aggression by Israel remains a grave concern. These acts violate Syrian sovereignty and pose a serious threat to regional peace and security. Repeated airstrikes and incursions not only undermine Syria's internal stability, but also weaken its ability to fight Daesh, thereby compromising our collective security. We unequivocally condemn these attacks and urge this Council to take immediate and resolute action to prevent further escalation. Syria's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity must be fully respected and must be protected. Full implementation of the 1974 Separation of Forces Agreement must be ensured. Mr. President, future of Syria must not be held hostage by terrorist entities. Organizations such as Daesh, PKK, YPG, and the so-called SDF must not be allowed to take any role in the country's future. We are closely following the implementation of the recent agreement between the Syrian administration and the SDF. It is essential that all terrorist structures are dismantled. All armed elements must disarm and surrender their capabilities to the Syrian state, and all terrorist actors, foreign terrorist actors especially, must be expelled from Syrian territory. We also reiterate Turkey's readiness to cooperate with the Syrian administration to secure detention centers and camps in the northeast of the country, an issue of shared security interest. Mr. President, Turkey remains fully committed to supporting the Syrian people in overcoming the challenges of this new chapter. We stand ready to work in close coordination with Syria, regional partners, and the international community to ensure that this opportunity for peace and stability is not missed. Mr. President, dear colleagues, Syrian revolution took a long time, unfortunately, and caused a lot of casualties and destruction of the country. And unfortunately, lack of coordination, understanding among the international community played a role on this. Now we are here when we have the opportunity to work with Syria and among us to help realize aspirations of the Syrian revolution and people sooner than later. Thank you.
Give the floor to members of the Council who wish to make statements. I give the floor first of all to the representative of the United States.
President, and thank you, Special Envoy Geir Peterson and Assistant Secretary General Joyce Nsuya, for your briefings on the dynamic political and humanitarian situation in Syria. We also acknowledge the presence here today of Syrian Interim Foreign Minister al-Shaibani. The United States continues to closely monitor the actions of the Syrian interim authorities. We remain hopeful that the interim cabinet announced by the interim authorities at the end of March represents a positive step. However, we expect to see additional action and the appointment of more qualified and representative individuals to serve in critical positions. As we have repeatedly made clear, we will hold Syrian interim authorities accountable for the following steps: to fully renounce and suppress terrorism, adopt a policy of non-aggression to neighboring states, exclude foreign terrorist fighters from any official roles, prevent Iran and its proxies from exploiting Syrian territory, destroy weapons of mass destruction, assist in the recovery of U.S. citizens disappeared in Syria, and ensure the security and freedoms of all Syrians. Mr. President, the Syrian people also deserve leadership that is transparent, accountable, and fully committed to a more peaceful and prosperous future after 54 years of ruinous rule under the Assad regime. We have noted the interim authorities' decision to extend the mandate of the Independent Investigative Committee on the Coastal Violence. We expect this time will be used to visit all locations where atrocities were committed, to interview as many survivors as possible, and to produce a comprehensive report that will lead to action by the interim authorities. We expect all perpetrators to be held accountable, especially those in leadership roles or who were otherwise high profile. This will send a clear message to all Syrians that no one is above the law in the new Syria. Mr. President, we also expect the interim authorities to continue to make progress in allowing, securing, and facilitating access for OPCW to chemical weapons storage locations and evidence, leading to the eventual destruction of all chemical weapons. Colleagues, we can and should herald the recent adoption of a UN resolution renewing the Commission of Inquiry investigating atrocities committed under the Assad regime since March of 2011. We commend Syria's support for this renewal and the first such support in the Commission's history. The Syrian people also deserve answers about their missing loved ones so they can finally have a measure of closure. To this end, we urge interim authorities to work closely with both the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism and the Independent Institution on Missing Persons, including by facilitating the opening of offices in Damascus for both institutions as quickly as possible. Mr. President, colleagues, last week, the United States announced that we will consolidate our military bases in Syria. This consolidation reflects the significant progress that the United States, with our partners and all members of the global coalition, have made toward downgrading ISIS's appeal and operational capability, both regionally and globally. As this consolidation takes place, consistent with President Trump's commitment to peace through strength, the U.S. Central Command will remain poised to take all necessary action against remnants of ISIS in Syria. We will also work closely with our partners, including the Syrian Democratic Forces and Syria Free Army, to respond to emergent terrorist threats. Mr. President, we continue to follow the implementation of the March 10th agreement with Syrian Democratic Forces and how the details of the agreements are developed. The model of agreement in Aleppo and the peaceful integration of interim government forces and the SDF are indeed encouraging signs of progress. We expect to see similar progress around the Tishreen Dam and in Afrin and Deir ez-Zor. Implementation of these agreements must lead to a unified state security structure and a framework that ensures ISIS fighters remain in detention. U.S. military forces have and will take all necessary actions so that ISIS can never reconstitute itself. Mr. President, the volatile security landscape in Syria necessitates continued coordination to address intertwined ISIS-associated humanitarian and security challenges in northeast Syria. It is critical to our collective security to responsibly reduce the population in the detention facilities and the Al-Hol and Roj displaced person camps through the expeditious repatriation of Iraqis and third country nationals in the care of the Syrian Democratic Forces. While we appreciate the countries that have repatriated some of their nationals from the region, it is time for all countries of origin to accelerate repatriation of all of their nationals from northeast Syria, whether displaced persons or detainees. It is also important for governments to ensure that they have the capabilities to effectively rehabilitate and reintegrate individuals returning from northeast Syria. The return of Syrian displaced persons from Al-Hol and Roj to their communities is also critical, and we encourage the interim authorities and the United Nations to finalize preparations for these returns. The United States continues to observe the actions of the interim authorities and will determine our actions based on a pattern of behavior. The core leadership must move beyond its past. Mr. President, we hope for the future of Syria, that they will reaffirm Syrians' hopes to see a calm, stable country so that Syrians can live finally in peace with themselves and their neighbors. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we are grateful to the Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the United Nations for Syria, Geir Pedersen, and the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Joyce Msuya, for the comprehensive overview of the situation in Syria. We welcome the participation in today's meeting of the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Syria, Assad al-Shabani. We share the assessment that the security situation in Syria remains exceedingly alarming. We are troubled by the ongoing clashes between the Syrian National Army and the Syrian Democratic Forces, despite the fact that a formal agreement was arrived at for the integration of both groups into the new national security forces. We have observed that the Israelis have continued to carry out arbitrary strikes targeting the entirety of Syria, and they're continuing to expand their presence in Quneitra, where they have already managed to organize a military base. Unfortunately, the situation along the Lebanese-Syrian border remains tense, and there's an ongoing persistent terrorist threat posed by ISIL and other terrorist groups who remain rampant in Syria. Against this backdrop, it is important for calls for the respect of Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity not to be empty slogans, for them to be respected in practice by all United Nations member states, including Syria's neighbors. There's a need to see to it that Israel revert back to implementation of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement and to halt its strikes on Syrian territory and to withdraw its troops from Syria, especially given that in Damascus has repeatedly reaffirmed its willingness to build constructive relations with all neighbors, barring none. We value progress that has been achieved in dialogue with between the Syrian authorities and the Kurds, including the achievement of an agreement on the handover of control to the authorities of the Sheikh Maksud neighborhood in Aleppo and the Tapka Dam on the Euphrates, as well as the launch of the working group which has been stipulated under the agreement signed on 10 March in Damascus between Ahmed Shara and the SDF commander Mazloum Abdi. We believe that the successful establishment of cooperation with the Kurds will help to advance international cohesion in Syria and will send a positive message to the remaining ethno-religious minorities. Against this backdrop, we continue to be alarmed about the situation in coastal areas, first and foremost in Latakia and Tartus provinces, where there's a persistent level of instability and tensions are rife. These regions have not yet recovered after the recent tragic events, which claimed the lives largely of civilians, Alawite civilians. Thousands of people were forced to flee their homes. Let us recall that many of the victims and those who fled violence have found a temporary refuge outside of the country. Some have taken cover at the Russian Khmeimim air base, where they remain to this day. We call upon OCHA to pay particular attention to the humanitarian situation in these regions where, according to UN assessments, at the minimum, 1.2 million Syrians are in dire need of assistance. We believe that the reconstruction which has begun of the UN humanitarian architecture in Syria needs to reflect the specific needs of Syria's neighboring regions, and the specialized structures need to be endowed with the necessary resources to react expeditiously to challenges that emerge. Turning to the developments in the West, these are murky events with respect to which a multitude of questions persist. In this respect, what is of particular significance is the work of what was established on 9 March. I refer to the Independent Investigative and Fact-Finding Committee to identify the circumstances of what transpired in the western coastal areas of Syria. We have taken note of the decision taken by Ahmed Shara to extend the deadline for the submission of the report by 3 months. We hope that this time will be used in order to ensure that there be a comprehensive, transparent, independent, and impartial investigation carried out in accordance with international standards to hold all perpetrators to account, as is stipulated in the relevant United Nations Security Council presidential statement. This will shape the foundation of future relations between Damascus and the Alawite community, as well as other ethno-religious minorities. It is important for the outcomes of this investigation to be conveyed both to the UN Security Council and to the Special Envoy. There's a need also to address and get to the bottom of the signals about the mass abductions of Syrian women and girls in the west of Syria. Such developments are unacceptable for any secular state. The perpetrators must be identified and punished. Mr. President, Syria continues to experience one of the most acute and protracted humanitarian crises of modern times. The overwhelming majority of Syrians live below the poverty line, and millions continue to need urgent humanitarian assistance. Children are particularly vulnerable insofar as they have been stripped of access to basic services, including education. On a day-to-day basis, they have had to cope with the consequences of the profound socioeconomic crisis. We have seen positive signals from the new Syrian authorities. They have demonstrated a willingness to cooperate on matters of delivering humanitarian assistance. We welcome the visible uptick in the work to rebuild critically important infrastructure, as well as measures undertaken to deliver food and medical assistance. We value the trends that have been observed vis-à-vis the return of Syrian refugees. More than 430,000 have already returned to the Syrian Arab Republic in the past 4 months. However, we do have to note that the volumes of humanitarian assistance objectively remain insufficient in light of the catastrophic shortage of financing. As of to date, only 9% of the necessary $2 billion have been mobilized, and this is what was requested, $2 billion requested for the period from January to June, and this is particularly concerned in light of the fact that voluntary repatriation of refugees needs to be accompanied by the establishment of appropriate conditions for dignified lives. Otherwise, humanitarian problems and social tensions will continue to escalate. We call upon the international community to urgently mobilize resources to demonstrate solidarity and to prevent the hope for peace and recovery in Syria to be extinguished. Russia remains committed to the delivery of assistance to the Syrian people. We have been continuing to deliver assistance both bilaterally and through international organizations. Despite the fact that the West has imposed financial restrictions against the Russian Federation, we have nevertheless recently managed to make another voluntary contribution to the budget of the World Food Program, $5 million of which will be allocated for the delivery of food to Syria. Through the FAO, agreement is being arrived at with the Syrian authorities regarding modalities for the implementation of the plan financed by the Russian Federation to the tune of $8 million to help rebuild the agricultural sector in the country. Mr. President, we continue to advocate for the fact that there is no alternative to an inclusive political process, a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned political process with support from the United Nations in accordance with the letter and the spirit of Security Council Resolution 2254. We extend our support for the efforts of the Special Envoy, Mr. Peterson. We deem it important further to ensure that the international support for intra-Syrian dialogue be universal in nature, sidelining any of the leading regional or international players will merely make this process more tenuous and fragile. Syria, where every ethnic and religious group will not feel itself to be oppressed or marginalized, where they all represented and in the security and governmental structures. This is the Syria that will be impervious to any attempts to undermine its sovereignty or territorial integrity. At the same time, there can be no room in the country for foreign terrorist fighters whose hands are stained in blood, and these people have nothing to do with the Syrian population. These are very serious problems, and we hope We should like to hope that the new Syrian leadership will undertake rigorous measures to address this. We reaffirm Russia's commitment to build comprehensive, mutually beneficial cooperation with Damascus on all matters on the bilateral agenda in order to reinforce the traditionally friendly Russian-Syrian relations. We believe that the Syrian people will manage to surmount all of the challenges which they face, and we stand ready to do everything possible to bring this about. Thank you. Arab Republic. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Geir Peterson, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, and Madam Joyce Msuya, Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I give the floor to the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, Mr. Geir Peterson. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I'm very pleased to brief the Security Council for the first time in your presence, my dear friend, Minister Shebani. Welcome to New York. Your participation today reflects the significant developments that Syria has undergone in recent months. I appreciate your commitment to fostering regional stability and engaging constructively at the international level. Mr. President, equally, I welcome the Security Council's unity on Syria as demonstrated in its statements of December and March, and its continued support for a Syrian-owned, Syrian-led, UN-facilitated political transition in line with key principles of Security Council Resolution 2254. Mr. President, it's only 4.5 months since the fall of the former regime and the opening of a new chapter in Syria's history. I salute the Syrian people who, amidst continued suffering and many uncertainties and dangers, show overwhelmingly that they want this political transition to succeed. The legacy of misrule, conflict, abuses and poverty from which Syria is trying to emerge is one of the heaviest that any state or people anywhere has had to face in modern times. This means that the situation is inherently still extremely fragile. The vital ingredients to address this fragility are clear. We need genuine political inclusion so that all Syrians can participate meaningfully in shaping their country's political future, along with countering extremism and terrorism, and real support from the international community to give this transition a chance to succeed against great odds. That political transition is now at a critical juncture. The legal vacuum that existed before the Constitutional Declaration was issued has been partly filled by it. Syria has moved beyond a caretaker government to a new, expanded, and more diverse cabinet. This is indeed an improvement from what went before. Yet it is still not fully inclusive framework for a political transition. And, Mr. President, this leaves many Syrians unsure of their place in the new, emerging new Syria. There is obviously a concentration of power and plans for establishing the rule of law, a new social contract, and ultimately free and fair elections remain to be seen. Many women are telling us that they are worried about societal and political trends, and there is only one woman among the 22 in cabinet. And many among Syria's components are still reeling from the violence on the coast in March, which took a toll on confidence and trust. The March events were of course sparked by a violent challenge to state authority. And with state authority far from being established, with a range of armed groups still operating, and with unprecedented levels of poverty in the country that still are heavily under sanctions, these are serious underlying tensions on several fronts. Mr. President, I appreciated the open and substantive discussions on these challenges with Interim President al-Shara in Damascus 2 weeks ago, building on several meetings with him and with you, Minister. A crucial next step in the political transition are the plans to establish the Interim People's Assembly. Mr. al-Shara explained his thinking on this in quite some detail. I, on my behalf, stress the need for substantive efforts towards inclusivity, transparency and openness, given that this body will have an urgent legislative reform agenda on many areas that affect all Syrians, and the need to ensure that this body is seen by Syrians as representing both the unity and the diversity of the nation. I had the pleasure of meeting the Minister this morning, and we have shared ideas, options, and best practices with the interim authorities on these issues. And, Minister, I welcome your readiness to deepen the dialogue on this important matter. We also discussed in Damascus the need for future constitutional processes that is not framed as a technical or expert exercise alone, but is rather one that involves all of Syria's societal and political components in shaping together Syria's new social contract, laying the basis for free and fair elections thereafter. An urgent challenge remains the situation on the coast. In Damascus, I met with members of the Alawite community who conveyed their deep concerns and presented harrowing accounts of violence. I talked with President Shara at length about this, along with a member of his Civil Peace High Commission, who detailed their efforts to address this issue. Under Secretary General Di Carlo and Deputy Special Envoy Rochdi met with the Independent National Investigative and Fact-Finding Committee, whose mandate have now been extended for 3 months. I appealed to Syrians with allegations of violence to engage with the committee, which is examining all incidents since March 6 and until the time it ends its mission. And I appealed to the interim authorities to make the committee's finding public in line with international standards and to take the necessary steps to bring perpetrators of violence against civilians to justice as called for by the Security Council. But, Mr. President, a sense of grievance still exists on both sides. A deep feeling of exclusion from the political process and the public sector on one side, but also profound grievances towards persons associated with the former regime on the other. The interim authority needs to ensure that all segments of Syrian society are not only protected, but also feel that they will be full participants in political life and state structures, including in terms of security. Meanwhile, every step towards establishing the rule of law and moving on transitional justice will help reassure all components of the Syrian society. It will help reduce the likelihood of individuals or groups taking justice in their own hands or committing revenge-driven attacks, sporadic incidents of which worryingly continue. We are also receiving reports of women and girls being adopted. I have raised this with the minister this morning, and he agreed anything of this kind is of course unacceptable, and invited me to share any information we have on this, which of course we will do. It is important to reassure the impacted communities on this. Mr. President, another key task is to pursue a peaceful reintegration of northeast Syria. I reiterated to Mr. al-Shara my welcome of his 10th March agreement with Mr. Mazloum Abdi. I have conveyed the same message to Mr. Mazloum. There have been a number of encouraging steps and signals. The formation of committees and reciprocal visits, the development in the northeast of a common negotiating approach involving a range of Kurdish parties, a deal on mutual security arrangements in Kurdish majority areas of Aleppo city, agreed withdrawals from Tishrim Dam, which needs to be implemented, efforts to forge common ground on education, and, importantly, a marked military de-escalation by all Syrian and international actors. Mr. President, it is critical that these and other steps, many of a confidence-building nature, feed into the broader political process in line with the key principles of Security Council Resolution 2254, in which all Syrian sides and segments must participate. The question of the Northeast presents major challenges and risks. The presence of ISIL inside and outside of camps as international funding is dwindling, a sizable military force still operating outside of Damascus command structures, a complex demographic and political mix, and key political demands regarding Kurdish rights and issues of decentralization and identity. Both sides will need the political will to compromise so that northeast Syria can be integrated through a Syrian process in a way that maintains stability in the country and the region and restores Syria's sovereignty and unity. We are deepening engagements in support of this process. Its success is crucial for the viability of any Syrian political transition. Mr. President, as I discussed with President al-Shara, there is a positive intention to ensure that no weapons can be held outside state control, whether in the north, south, east, or west of the country, coupled with ideas on how to disarm, demobilize, and reintegrate different factions. This process is complex and it will take time. An enabling political environment of inclusive governance structures which receive timely and adequate international support would help the integration of the remaining armed factions into a national army and their disarmament. I had detailed discussion with the President on the concerns of Council members related to foreign terrorist fighters. The issue remains a very serious one, and there is a need to see more progress on this front. I note the fact that exchanges are continuing on this issue with several relevant states. Mr. President, ongoing Israeli violations of Syria's territorial integrity are undermining the transition. A violent confrontation in early April in Deraa Governorate between Israeli forces well beyond the 1974 lines and armed locals resulted in 9 civilian casualties on the Syrian side, according to the Syrian Arab Republic. A week later, there was a wave of Israeli airstrikes on Damascus, Hama, and Homs, including air bases, reportedly causing casualties, including civilians. These attacks must cease. I also reiterate my appeal for full respect for the 1974 disengagement of forces agreement and for this Council to hold Israel to its commitment that it does not seek territorial gains in Syria. Israel must withdraw and respect Syria's sovereignty, territorial integrity, unity, and independence. This highly confrontational approach is not warranted, particularly given that there is plainly scope for diplomacy. This was clear from my meetings in Damascus. I welcome regional talks that have taken place, including talks between Turkiye and Israel in Azerbaijan, which I hope can contribute to de-escalation. Mr. President, the economic situation in Syria is truly disastrous, and levels of humanitarian assistance are dwindling, a huge danger, which OCHA will no doubt be addressing. Beyond the humanitarian, there can be no successful political stability and transition without genuine economic recovery and stability. I commend the support of the region that is enabling Syria to see debts to the World Bank repaid, and I note the meetings that the Syrian financial officials have had in recent days with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund in Washington. I appreciate the sanctions relief measures to date, and I welcome the fact that discussions are continuing regarding civilian public sector salaries. I also note yesterday's actions by the United Kingdom, with further designations lifted and sectoral sanctions revoked. Mr. President, almost all Syrians in and out of the country echo the call for sanctions easing to be at a larger scale and a quicker pace. This is essential to reactivate Syria's economy, to realize concrete support from the region, and to enable many to actively participate in a national effort to rebuild their country. The reality is that the complex intersection of sanctions on Syria hampers peace dividends that we should be seeing from the suspensions already granted. And the chilling effects of sanctions is long-lasting. I therefore call on governments to engage with the private sector to ensure that sanctions suspensions granted so far in critical sectors such as energy and banking are indeed materialized. I also urge the further relaxation of sanctions on investments, exports and services, all of which impact the delivery of essential services, including health and education. And a crucial part of this is enabling those states that want to help to be reassured that they can do so without fear from secondary sanctions. Mr. President, in conclusion, a lot has been achieved, and there is much to commend and support. But the challenges are huge, and the situation is extremely fragile. There is a need for much more political inclusion and for much more economic action. With a sea change on both these elements, the political transition in Syria can succeed. Without both, it likely will not. And the consequences should not be acceptable, and we cannot accept that that happens. That is why the United Nations is working to facilitate and assist a Syrian-led and owned process, working in accordance with our mandate in the Resolution 2254. I hope the Security Council can continue to support this work. Thank you.
I thank the Special Envoy, Mr. Peterson, for his briefing, which stresses the fact that there is hope, but also there are challenges that remain to be surmounted. And I now give the floor to Madam the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Joyce Msuya.
Thank you, Mr. President. And allow me to acknowledge the participation of Minister Al-Shaibani in today's meeting, which is an important signal of how timely and critical this discussion is for Syria. Special Envoy Peterson has set out the complexity of the challenges Syria is navigating as its people seek to seize a historic opportunity for a better future. And all of this is taking place against the backdrop of what remains one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. Nearly 3/4 of the population are in need, more than half are facing food insecurity, 7 million people are displaced. Today, I want to highlight 4 main points for this Council's attention. First, while we welcome the significant reductions in hostilities, we must keep a clear focus on de-escalating conflict where it persists and ensuring the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. The improving security situation in parts of Aleppo Governorate and northeast Syria in recent weeks, following agreements between the interim authorities and the Syrian Democratic Forces, has already had tangible benefits for civilians. Attacks affecting civilians and civilian infrastructure have receded. Movement restrictions have eased in parts of Aleppo city. Thousands of people displaced in the northeast are preparing to return to Afrin. Following an agreement on joint administration of the Tishrin Dam in eastern Aleppo, UNICEF and other partners are coordinating with relevant authorities on expanding the supply of power from the dam to water facilities serving over 3 million people. In the coastal areas, despite a marked improvement in the security situation, incidents affecting civilians continue to be reported. Tens of thousands of people remain displaced, including over 30,000 people who have fled to Lebanon. The UN is working with local partners to deliver critical assistance, although insecurity continues to limit access to many rural areas. During the past month, Israeli airstrikes continued in various locations, and incursions in southern governorates have led to armed confrontations on multiple occasions. Some incidents have resulted in civilian casualties. Meanwhile, explosive remnants of war continue to injure or kill people, including children, on a near daily basis. More than 700 casualties have been recorded since December 8th, an average of more than 5 people each day. Mr. President, the second point I would like to highlight is that we continue to provide critical assistance to millions of people each month, and to do so in a way that maximizes our limited resources. The UN and its partners are providing support for health and water facilities that have been hollowed by years of conflict and underinvestment. This month, the World Health Organization is providing essential medicines to health facilities in Aleppo, Hama, Latakia, and Tartus to enable treatment for over 100,000 patients with chronic illnesses in the next 3 months. And with support from SURF, the OCHA-managed Central Emergency Response Fund delivered 2.7 tons of trauma surgery kits, essential medicines, and other emergency supplies to hospitals in Deir ez-Zor in the northeast. NGOs have begun rehabilitating hospitals damaged by years of war in areas like rural Damascus and Idlib. Alongside providing clean water and sanitation services to displaced families in IDP sites, UNICEF and partners are rehabilitating 180 water and sanitation facilities, including water treatment plants in cities, water pumping stations, and sanitation plants. Since December, over 2,000 unexploded ordnance items have been securely discarded in more than 1,400 clearance operations. We continue to provide vital assistance, including food, household items, and support for clean water to people affected by last month's violence in coastal areas. And we continue to pursue all available routes to provide aid as efficiently as possible. Since the start of the year, 960 trucks have delivered aid through the cross-border operation from Turkiye, a relatively cost-effective route, more trucks than during the whole of 2024. On Tuesday, for example, 24 trucks carried food and other supplies for over 55,000 people through the Bab al-Hawa crossing. However, Mr. President, and this brings me to my third point, we need more funding to sustain this work, let alone scale it further. To date, we have received $186 million, less than 10% of the requirements for the first half of 2025. This continues to translate into serious consequences for our response. UNHCR expects its team in Syria to shrink by 30% at a time when the need to support refugee returns is growing. Nearly half of UNHCR's 122 community centers will close by the summer without more funding. WFP has warned that it needs $100 million to avoid a disruption in food assistance in August. Many NGOs, particularly in the Northeast, are facing particularly alarming shortfalls. In Deir ez-Zor, hospitals serving over 200,000 people are at risk of closing next month without additional funding. In the Northwest, over 170 health facilities risk running out of funds by the end of next month. My final point, Mr. President, is that we need to sustain momentum for investment in Syria's recovery and development. Without this, the scale of humanitarian needs will far exceed our ability to respond to them. Millions of refugees and internally displaced persons who have expressed their desire to return home will continue to be dissuaded by a lack of basic services and livelihood opportunities. And the hope to seize this critical opportunity to build a more prosperous future risks slipping away. Thank you.
Je remercie Madame la
I would like to thank Madam ASG for Humanitarian Affairs for this briefing, which shows the gravity of the humanitarian situation and the commitment from the international community. And I thank the permanent representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Denmark.
President. And I thank Special Envoy Peterson and Assistant Secretary General Masuya for their briefings. Minister Al-Shabani, we welcome your participation in the meeting today. We see it as an important signal of your commitment to engage with the international community to bring peace and security to your country. Ahlan wa sahlan. Mr. President, I'll focus on 3 key areas. After 14 years of brutal conflict, 9 out of 10 Syrians live in poverty and millions are suffering from food scarcity and malnutrition. Improvements in the humanitarian situation are not only moral imperatives, they represent the foundation for lasting stability in Syria. We cannot expect a nation to make political progress if the people are hungry, displaced, or deprived of basic services. On the ground, that means providing a reliable energy supply, especially electricity, while at the same time securing access to water and food. Denmark's support to Syria spans many years. Since the beginning of the conflict, we have provided some $900 million to Syria and its neighboring countries. Today, that commitment remains steadfast. At the recent Brussels conference, Denmark pledged almost $100 million in support for Syria and its neighboring countries. Syria's needs remain immense, commensurate with the scale of its devastation. We urge the international community to remain engaged. Second, Mr. President, relief and recovery efforts must advance in tandem with improvement of security. Indeed, neglecting one inevitably undermines the other. We all recall the violence and widespread killing of civilians that rocked Syria's coastal region last month. Denmark strongly condemns these acts. We reiterate the need for a thorough investigation and that the perpetrators, regardless of their affiliation, are held accountable. Such internal stabilization efforts are critical in Syria. However, we must also bear the broader security situation in mind. In that respect, let me reaffirm Denmark's full support for Syria's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. We reiterate our full support for UNDOF and for the 1974 agreement and call for its full implementation. We also cannot allow ISIL or Daesh to re-emerge. Efforts within Syria and internationally should be directed at this aim. Ultimately, when a sense of normalcy and safety begins to return, communities can begin to heal and reconcile. This can also help build the necessary confidence in the political process. That brings me to the third point, Mr. President. We call for a credible, inclusive, and transparent Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition process, one that is in line with the principles of Resolution 2254 of this Council. We welcome the formation of the transitional government as a step in the right direction. Equally important is the resumption of a national dialogue with civil society organizations. The best way to ensure that all aspects of the political transition are truly robust is to make them generally inclusive. When everyone sees themselves in the process, when the needs and expectations of communities are heard, and the diversity of Syrian society is represented, a shared future can be forged. An ambitious, transparent plan for transitional justice is another fundamental aspect to end impunity and prevent future atrocities in Syria. In this regard, we reiterate our full support for the work of the Independent Institution for Missing Persons, the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism, and the Independent International Commission of Inquiry to assist the transitional government in this process. We call on the Syrian transitional government to continue to engage meaningfully with the United Nations and to give input to the ongoing strategic assessment for the UN's future presence in Syria. Mr. President, in closing, the Syrian transitional government has enormous opportunity to transform the country for the better, but it cannot do it alone. Denmark will continue its strong support for Syria and the Syrian people. We look forward to working closely with Syria, this Council, and the broader international community to this end. I thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Denmark for her statement. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Greece. Thank you, President.
Thank our briefers, Special Envoy Pedersen and ASG Misuya for the detailed briefings and committed work on the file. Mr. President, several months since the seismic change that took place last December, Syria still strives to find its footing. A demanding political transition is currently unfolding against the backdrop of precarious economic and security conditions. We are ready to offer support to Syria's transition and ensure that the Syrian people will see peace and prosperity once more after 14 years of bloodshed and deprivation. In this context, I would like to highlight the following 3 points. First, the political transition in Syria needs to be fully inclusive and Syrian-led and owned, as justice and accountability remain critical. Acknowledging the presence of the Syrian Foreign Minister, Ms. Al-Shabani, here with us today, let me reiterate that Greece stands in full support with the Syrian people. We are committed to continue engaging positively with Syria and assisting towards a brighter, more prosperous future for the benefit of the whole region. The Greek Foreign Minister was one of the first EU ministers to visit Damascus in February and offered a concrete signal of support in this regard. At the same time, we expect on Syrian decision makers to opt for political inclusiveness, fully protecting and integrating all components of the Syrian society. These include Christians, Alawites, Druze, and Kurds. It also entails an active participation of women in the process. It is of paramount importance to avoid relapse into sectarian and inter-community violence. Against this background, we took note of the formation of the transitional government in Damascus. While it does indeed include one representative per society component, much is left to be desired, as it does not fully take into account the demographic data. We consider that there is still space for improvement, especially in terms of the participation of women and the representation of all components of the Syrian society, also in key cabinet positions. Likewise, the Constitutional Declaration as a framework for a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society is a significant first step, but state-building principles, such as the separation of powers and the introduction of checks and balances, are indispensable for the viability of institutions and the legitimacy of the administration. Progress along the political transition track has not been met with universal acceptance for all communities. Their concerns and aspirations can be better expressed through the national dialogue, which we urge the authorities to keep alive in the ensuring political transition. We also encourage the deeper involvement of civil society components. As Special Envoy Peterson noted, the need for repairing deep sectarian fractures and mistrust is huge, and comprehensive work is required. Similarly, the agreement between the SDF and Damascus on March 10 is valuable, committing the parties to engaging non-violently. We welcome the recognition of key Kurdish needs that this implies, as well as the seeming stabilization of northern Syria that this entails. We are closely monitoring next steps in implementation, considering the inclusion and integration of the Kurdish population in Syria to be essential for its stable future. We urge all regional actors to refrain from violence and inciting escalation in this regard. Mr. President, recent political transition developments were overshadowed by the appalling violence in the coastal region in early March, involving the death of more than 1,000 innocent civilians, mostly Alawites and Christians. The violence was rightfully and strongly condemned by this Council on 14th of March, clearly highlighting the urgency for full accountability and transitional justice. The swift decision of the caretaker authorities to establish an investigative committee to hold the perpetrators accountable is seen as a positive move by the international community. We are now eager to welcome the publication of the transparent and impartial investigation process, encouraged by the positive meeting of the committee with USG Di Carlo in Syria during her recent visit. In the same spirit, we invite the transitional government to allow the Independent International Commission of Inquiry to investigate all violations and look forward to the presentation of the 11th report of the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism at the General Assembly on the 29th of April, encouraged by the Foreign Minister Shabani's scheduled participation in the said discussion. Likewise, we were encouraged by the extensive discussion held between the Syrian Transitional President and Special Envoy Peterson on April 6, fully supporting a more substantive and frequent engagement between Syria and the UN. Second, Syria's economic conditions are precarious, while international support is critically needed. I wish to reiterate Greece's full solidarity with all Syrian people. Recognizing the harsh humanitarian condition, as described by ESG Moussouya during her sober briefing, we pledge our support for Syria recovery at the recent Brussels conference, contributing to the EU commitment of some 2.5 billion euros. With our consent and constructive engagement, the EU was swift in suspending certain restrictive measures as part of a gradual, conditional, irreversible approach, and will continue to examine possible further suspensions on the basis of close monitoring of the situation on the ground. This approach is adopted in solidarity with all Syrian people as we attempt to ensure that expectations are met in terms of an inclusive political transition, accountability, as well as full adherence to international law, including, let me stress, the international law of the sea. In this context, we must also not lose sight of the right of all Syrians to return home and help rebuild the country. Third and last point, the security situation requires a collective vigilance. As often described by briefings to this Council, the threat of radical groups re-emerging in Syria is ever present as foreign fighters still operate within the country. As advocated by Special Envoy Peterson and other Council members, an effective approach to comprehensive security sector reform, as well as disarmament, demobilization, or reintegration, is surely needed. This is an area in which the UN is well placed to contribute significantly and join the required experience and expertise. We thus invite Syria to positively engage with the UN towards this goal. We also believe that it is significant for regional stability to ensure the viability and security of camps holding ISIS fighters and their relatives in northern Syria. We equally welcome as important for regional stability that Syria intends to positively engage with the regional partners such as Lebanon, and we hope that dialogue on bilateral issues such as border delimitation will begin. Last but not least, we would be remiss not to reiterate our full support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria, which must be fully respected by all, upholding relevant international agreements and United Nations Security Council resolution. Mr. President, in concluding, let me stress that as Syria stands at a crossroads, we must remain cautious of the dangers and challenges that lie ahead. We believe Syria's future can be bright and prosperous at the end of an inclusive political transition involving transitional justice and accountability, as well as the improvement of the country's economic and security condition. The Syrian people can count on Greece to be on the side along this path. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Greece for a statement, and I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the participation of His Excellency Mr. Asad Hassan al-Shaybani, Foreign Minister of the Syrian Arab Republic, in today's meeting. We also thank Special Envoy Pedersen and ASG Masuya for their valuable briefings. Syria, with its ancient, rich, and diverse heritage and resilient people, has long stood as a cradle of civilization. Today, after years of conflict and suffering, it finds itself at a pivotal juncture. Recent political developments present an opportunity for peace, unity, and reconstruction. We are hopeful that the new Syrian leadership will chart a course towards inclusivity, stability, and prosperity. The international community must seize this moment to support Syria's transition. Pakistan has been concerned about the protracted conflict in Syria and its profound humanitarian and regional consequences. Addressing this crisis requires a comprehensive approach, one that acknowledges the interlinked challenges facing the Syrian people. Allow me to highlight 5 key points in this regard. First, we welcome the formation of Syria's new government. This step has filled the constitutional vacuum and restored a legitimate framework for international engagement. It is a necessary move toward peace and national reconciliation. Pakistan continues to support a Syrian-owned and Syrian-led inclusive political process based on the principles contained in Security Council Resolution 2254. We recognize regional and international efforts aimed at facilitating Syria's peaceful transition and reintegration into the international community, and urge that all these efforts be aligned solidly behind the overall shared objective of durable peace and stability in Syria. Second, sanctions remain a major impediment to Syria's recovery. With over 80% of the population living below the poverty line, and with the economy in crisis, unilateral coercive measures severely constrain humanitarian efforts and post-conflict reconstruction. These measures limit access to essential goods, services, and financial resources. In light of the evolving ground realities, we urge a comprehensive reassessment of these sanctions, which must not hinder humanitarian relief or national recovery. Third, transitional justice and national reconciliation are essential. The recent violence in coastal regions underscores the urgency of addressing historical grievances and promoting inclusive justice. Any transitional justice mechanism must be impartial, objective, and avoid a retributive approach. It should be supported by neutral international stakeholders, including the United Nations. We note the recent extension of a deadline for the fact-finding committee and stress the importance of a transparent and credible inquiry into recent incidents. Fourth, stability in Syria hinges on the unification of its military and security institutions. We must also remain vigilant against terrorism. The UN sanctions regime should be reviewed to ensure it supports humanitarian and reconstruction efforts while maintaining safeguards against the resurgence of terrorist groups and their affiliates. Striking this balance between enabling recovery and countering terrorism must guide our collective approach. Fifth, Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity must be fully respected. Pakistan is deeply alarmed by the continued and intensified Israeli airstrikes on Syrian territory and statements about a long-term military presence in southern Syria. These actions constitute blatant violations of international law and relevant Security Council resolutions. Pakistan strongly condemns these violations and calls for full compliance with the 1974 disengagement agreement. Israel's occupation of the Syrian Golan Heights remains illegal. In line with Security Council Resolution 497, it is null and void. This council must demand Israel's complete withdrawal from the occupied Golan Heights. Finally, the humanitarian situation in Syria remains dire. Over 16.5 million people require assistance. Nearly 40% of hospitals and over 50% of primary healthcare facilities are non-functional. The scale of this suffering calls for urgent and sustained international assistance. Alongside emergency relief, we must prioritize the restoration of basic infrastructure and essential public services to support long-term recovery. In conclusion, Madam President, at this consequential moment in Syria's journey, the imperative is clear: to transform the promise of peace into a tangible reality for its people. This demands a comprehensive approach and continued international engagement and support that empowers the Syrian people to shape their own destiny. After years of conflict and immeasurable suffering, the Syrian people deserve a future that is marked by dignity, stability, and opportunity. Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering solidarity with the Syrian people and remains firmly committed to supporting all credible efforts towards a united, peaceful, and prosperous Syria. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Special Envoy Pedersen and ASG Musia for their briefing. Let me also welcome Foreign Minister Al-Shaibani to the Council. On the day the new Syrian flag was raised here at the UN, your presence is a powerful reminder of the opportunity that lies ahead for Syria to carve out a more secure, peaceful, and prosperous future. The UK stands with the Syrian people as they seize this historic moment. President, I will make 3 points today. First, we have already seen welcome progress in Syria's political transition. This includes the formation of a new government, creation of a constitutional committee, and work to address immediate security threats, including from chemical weapons. We have seen important steps towards reconciliation amongst Syria's diverse communities, including the recent agreement signed with the Syrian Democratic Forces. It is important that this outreach and consultation continues to help build a stable and unified country working in the interests of all Syrians. And after years of war and brutality under the Assad regime, issues of transitional justice and accountability must be prioritized. This includes steps to find missing persons and provide much-needed peace of mind to the families who've paid the ultimate price. Second, economic recovery will be a crucial part of efforts to build a more prosperous Syria. This week's meetings of the international financial institutions, with the participation of the Syrian government, are an important step in boosting international community support to drive investment and economic growth. And this week, the UK has lifted sanctions on sectors including trade, energy production, and finance. We hope these steps will help remove barriers to investment in Syria's economy, especially in the energy and electricity generation sector, which is essential for Syria's reconstruction. Finally, we reiterate that respect for Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity is crucial for both Syrian security and that of its neighbours. We are concerned by Israeli actions which risk destabilising the region. We call on all actors to uphold the 1974 disengagement agreement.
President, Syrians have already suffered greatly from years of conflict and misrule. As we heard from the briefers, they face considerable political, economic, and humanitarian challenges as they emerge from this dark chapter in their history. They deserve a better and more secure future. The UK will continue to support the Syrian government and its people in their efforts to achieve this. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Algeria.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the members of the A3+, namely Guyana, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and my own country, Algeria. At the outset, the A3+ warmly welcomes the presence of His Excellency Mr. Al-Assad Al-Shaibani, the Syrian Minister of Foreign Affairs. Your participation, Mr. Al-Shaibani, is a clear reflection of the interim authorities' commitment to working with the international community toward achieving an inclusive political transition in Syria, and underscores the importance of inclusive dialogue in shaping Syria's future. We also extend our sincere appreciation to Special Envoy Geert Pedersen and ASG Joyce Mtsuya for their briefings. Madam President, Syria stands at a pivotal moment in its history. Having endured profound hardship, its people now look to the future with hope and cautious optimism. This hope must be nurtured through sustained international support and cooperation. They envision a brighter Syria, built by and for all Syrians, where no one is marginalized, where human rights and dignity are upheld and protected, and where the Syrian people exercise full sovereignty over their territory. The A3+ firmly believes that a successful and inclusive transition must be Syrian-led and Syrian-owned, with the strong backing of the international community. This process must remain aligned with the principles of Security Council Resolution 2254. At this critical juncture, the role of the United Nations remains essential, and we reiterate our support to Mr. Pedersen in his endeavor. Therefore, we reiterate the importance of safeguarding the independence and operational capacity of the United Nations agencies. The A3+ welcomes the recent announcement of a new transitional government by the interim authorities and looks forward to subsequent steps that will help ensure an inclusive political process. We underline that lasting peace requires the engagement of all components of Syrian society. Inclusivity is not desirable. It is essential for sustainable coexistence and national reconciliation. This includes empowering women, youth, and communities. In this regard, we commend the ongoing dialogue between the interim authorities and various Syrian communities. Differences can and must be addressed through dialogue and reconciliation, not through confrontation. Madam President, the A3+ calls for the dissolution of all military factions and for their smooth integration into the new Syrian army. This step is critical for national unity and establishing a stable security environment. We also stress the importance of ensuring accountability for all violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law committed throughout the Syrian conflict. Justice and accountability are vital elements of reconciliation. The pain of the Syrian people runs deep, but we believe in their resilience and their capacity to find a durable solution to their challenges with the full support of the international community, including this Security Council. Madam President, the A3+ reiterates its unwavering support for Syria's unity, Syria's sovereignty, Syria's independence, and Syria's territorial integrity. These are not abstract ideals. These are fundamental principles that must be respected by all. In this vein, the A3+ remains seriously concerned about Israel's repeated attacks and violations of Syria's sovereignty. The A3+ strongly condemns this military operation that violate international law, including the United Nations charters, in particular Article 2, which prohibits the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any states. And we call for full compliance with the 1974 disengagement agreement. Moreover, we urge an immediate end to Israeli incursions into Syrian territories and the complete withdrawal of its forces. The Golan Heights remains Syrian under international law, as reaffirmed by Security Council Resolution 497. Madam President, after enduring one of the darkest chapters in its history, Syria has now embarked on the arduous path of rebuilding. This path requires the unwavering support of the international community. Syria must not become a theater of geopolitical competition or a haven for terrorism. Regional and international actors must refrain from actions that could undermine Syria's stability. Cooperative rather than rather than competitive international engagement is essential for Syria's recovery. At the same time, conditions must be created to prevent the resurgence of terrorism, which threaten both Syrians and broader international peace and security. Madam President, the humanitarian situation in Syria remains dire. The rising needs, coupled with unilateral sanctions, have worsened the plight of civilians, even as more than 1.5 million displaced persons have returned home since November last year. These circumstances do not create a conducive environment for the safe, voluntary, and dignified return of refugees and internally displaced persons. The A3+ calls upon donors to honor their financial pledges to humanitarian operations in Syria. We must help Syrians rebuild their lives and communities. These include investing in infrastructure, in education, and in health care to lay the foundation for long-term stability and prosperity. In this context, we welcome the engagement between the interim authorities and international financial institutions. Access to funding is critical, but its impact will remain limited as long as unilateral sanctions persist. Therefore, the A3+ calls for the lifting of unilateral sanctions, whose original justification no longer hold. Madam President, to conclude, the people of Syria deserve our steadfast support through concrete action, not just words. Unity and solidarity will be key in overcoming these challenges. Lasting stability and prosperity will require a comprehensive approach, one that promotes security, economic recovery, and inclusive governance. All efforts that risk derailing the transitional process in Syria must be avoided. Now, more than ever, the Security Council and the international community must stand united in support of Syria and its people. I thank you.
I thank the permanent representative of Algeria for his statement on behalf of A3+, and I give the floor now to the permanent representative of China.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Special Envoy Pedersen and ASG Masuya for their briefings. I welcome Mr. Assad Hassan al-Shabani, as well as the representatives of Iran, Turkey, and Libya to today's meeting. At present, the situation in Syria is at a critical stage. China pays great attention to the development of the situation in Syria and sincerely hopes that with the help of the international community, Syria will restore stability as soon as possible and embark on a path of peace and development. China looks forward to a broad and inclusive political transition in Syria. For some time now, all parties in Syria have made efforts to promote a political transition. China hopes that in the long-term interests of the country and its people, the parties concerned will achieve reconciliation through dialogue and consultation, and find a reconstruction plan in line with the will of the people. In this process, the principles of Security Council Resolution 2254 should be implemented, and the rights of all Syrian people should be guaranteed. China supports the UN in playing a role in Syria's political transition and calls on all parties to actively support Special Envoy Pedersen in his duties. Last month, indiscriminate killings against civilians took place along the Syrian coastal region. We expect the Syrian interim authorities to advance investigations in a transparent and responsible manner, timely release the results, and accept the oversight of the international community. The high level of terrorist activity in Syria is a source of concern. The presidential statement adopted by the Council last month emphasized the serious threat posed by foreign terrorist fighters to Syrian and regional security, and reaffirmed the unanimous position on combating FTFs. The Council's resolutions on terrorism must be fully and effectively implemented. There can be no double standards on counterterrorism, and any sheltering or condonement will ultimately lead to disaster. We urge the Syrian interim authorities to effectively fulfill its counterterrorism obligations and take all measures to combat all Council-listed terrorist organizations, including the ETIM, also known as the Turkistan Islamic Party. Syria faces a...
I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Special Envoy Mr. Pedersen for his briefing and for his efforts to help Syria through transition process. He continues to have our full support. I also would like to thank Assistant Secretary General Msuya for her briefing, and of course we welcome Minister of Foreign Affairs and expatriates Al-Shaibani to the meeting. Mr. President, if Syria's historic transition is to be successful and inclusive, Syria has the opportunity to become a stable, secure, prosperous country where rights and dignity of every individual are respected and safeguarded. A country in peace with itself and its neighbors. It is a monumental task that requires proactive engagement of the entire society. In Syria, it requires making difficult yet necessary decisions anchored in the rule of law and based on an inclusive national dialogue. Syria requires increased and continued regional and international support. In this regard, let me make 3 points. First, violence must end and Syria's sovereignty, territorial integrity and independence must be respected. We acknowledge that countries in the immediate neighborhood have legitimate security concerns. Those would be best served by peaceful and stable Syria. External military interventions do not contribute to this objective. On the contrary, these actions risk further destabilizing Syria and the wider region, which is in no one's interest. In this vein, we reiterate the need to fully respect the 1974 disengagement agreement. We call on all parties to refrain from any activity that could further inflame tensions, escalate conflict, exacerbate human suffering, and jeopardize credible, inclusive, and peaceful political transition. In this highly complex landscape, a clear path forward on security issues is essential and must include a comprehensive security sector reform. So we call on Syria's interim authorities to not leave any room on its territory for the return of extremism and terrorism. Second, an inclusive political transition must include transitional justice. in line with the core principles of the UN Security Council Resolution 2254. Only a transition in which all Syrians can freely express their expectations and which is founded on full respect for human rights can rebuild the fabric of society and restore the much-needed trust. We encourage continued efforts towards a credible and truly inclusive transition, with full, equal, meaningful and safe participation of Syrian women, youth and civil society in all transitional and peace-building efforts. One of these key expectations is the adoption of a swift and transparent approach to transitional justice. Ensuring accountability is essential for achieving national reconciliation. Accountability for the heinous crimes committed against the Syrians by the former regime, and those perpetrated by armed groups, including recent violence and killings. The key to break the cycle of violence is fighting impunity and establish accountability for perpetrators. We welcome the authorities' displayed openness to countries' visits and cooperation with UN mechanisms and institutions, including the Commission of Inquiry and the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism. We strongly encourage further coordination and cooperation in this regard. They are all a reflection of a genuine wish of international community to help. Third, to support the political process, international community must focus on supporting Syrians to rebuild their country. We call on all parties to ensure that humanitarian access remains safe and unhindered across Syria, and that civilians, critical civilian infrastructure, and humanitarian workers are protected. Urgent challenges like food insecurity, water scarcity, fuel shortages, landmine contamination, displacement, and critical shortages in healthcare require our immediate attention. So, Mr. President, to conclude, Slovenia remains ready to work with others and to assist Syrians in realizing a new Syria, free, inclusive, and secure in a stable region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama. Thank you, President. We'd like to thank the briefers, Special Envoy of the Secretary-General for Syria, Mr. Geir Pedersen, and ASD for Humanitarian Affairs, Ms. Joyce Msuya. We'd like to thank them both for their valuable interventions. We also recognize the presence of His Excellency Asad Hassan al-Shaibani, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Syrian Arab Republic. And we also welcome the participation of Libya, Iran, and Turkiye in this meeting. President, we think that the stability of Syria is critical to ensure the security of the entire region, and in so doing, to supporting sustainable paths towards peace and social cohesion is not just a shared responsibility, it is an inescapable priority. We recognize that the situation in Syria remains complex and that the support of the international community and the United Nations system, in particular, the Special Envoy's work, is critical to help build an inclusive political process and a process which is viable for a new Syria with the potential to start anew. Panama reiterates that respecting the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic must be the essential foundation, the springboard for all international efforts to help the country pursuant to the spirit of Resolution 2254. With the recent establishment of a new government in Syria, the country is at a critical political juncture to move towards a more representative and stable Syria, focusing as a priority on a national reconciliation and the well-being of its people after 14 years of a devastating civilian conflict. Building effective governance must include avoiding extremist influence from infiltrating into politics and combating the development of terrorist groups in Syria. We encourage all parties to use peaceful means of negotiation towards to move towards a just and lasting peace, to curb violence, and to focus on reaching agreements that prioritize the protection of civilians, particularly women, children, and older persons. President, we note the recent changes in the OCHA, and this decision is a significant step forward within the efforts to transition the UN to a new stage in Syria, towards a unified structure for coordination, which reflects the positive developments that have been achieved on the ground. However, we should not overlook the fact that, although the conflict has died down in many parts of the country, the humanitarian crisis in Syria is far from being over, and it remains a source of deep concern. More than 16 million people continue to require humanitarian assistance, and the majority of them are women and children. According to figures released by the UNHCR, it is estimated that since the 8th of December to April of this year, some 437,000 Syrians have crossed the borders from neighbor countries to go back to Syria, and that 1 million IDPs have returned to their homes. We must ensure that these returns are genuinely voluntary, safe, and sustainable, and that the appropriate conditions are put in place for all internally displaced persons who are still facing major challenges in their journey towards a stable life. In addition to this, international sanctions continue to pose obstacles for the delivery of humanitarian assistance. That is why we are among those who have called for this to be made more flexible, because the Syrian people deserve a genuine opportunity to move towards economic recovery and reconstruction. In addition to this, the presence of chemical weapons and unexploded ordnance remain a threat for the population. In order for the recent progress to be sustainable in Syria, it's critical that the disarmament process make headway at an equal pace to efforts to strengthen governance and security in the country. The indiscriminate violence that was perpetrated on the 6th of March threatens the political transition, and it requires an exhaustive investigation in which justice prevails and tangible progress is made in building an independent and democratic judicial system. We think that Syria needs a comprehensive process to address all violations of human rights and international law with the necessary rigor. These violations that have been seen during the conflict as a clear sign that an era of impunity is being ended. Panama reiterates its support to the specialized organs and independent organs established within the context of the UN to make headway in the search for detained persons and disappeared persons, as well as the compilation of evidence and proof. Disappeared persons matter, and this process will be critical, and it's very important that the wounds are allowed to heal so that accountability is reached and there is genuine progress towards truth and justice and reconciliation. Presidents, we reiterate our staunch support to UNDOF. We think it's a critical mission to preserve stability, to avoid a greater escalation, and also to facilitate conditions for dialogue. We're also committed to the 1974 separation agreement. The breach of this agreement threatens the security of local people and international staff who have been deployed on the ground. Panama is keeping a close eye on the current political process in Syria, and we hope that it will pave the way towards lasting peace for Syria, and also contribute to the stability of the entire region of the Middle East. We think that it is up to the Syrian people themselves to undertake a process of dialogue that will ensure the effective, meaningful participation of all sectors of society, particularly focusing on the inclusion of women, as well as ethnic and religious minorities. There must be political will to ensure that this is a genuine reality in practice. Thank you. I thank the representative of Panama, and I will now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of France. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Geir Pedersen and Ms. Musuya for their briefings on the situation in Syria. And in addition to this, for your commitment and the commitment of your teams working on the ground. I would also like to welcome the presence of His Excellency Mr. Asad Hassan Al-Shaibani, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Syrian transition. After decades, Syria has committed since the 8th of December in a historic transition phase. This period is giving rise to legitimate expectations and also major challenges that need to be overcome. France wants to stand alongside this new Syria, and we'd like to say 4 things today. First of all, we encourage the Syrian authorities to give absolute priority to the restoration of peace and reconciliation. To achieve this goal, the statement from the Paris conference held on the 13th of March, which was endorsed by the Syrian authorities, is a step forward. Restoring peace means moving forward with absolute determination to combat terrorism. And this means combating Daesh and ensuring that we resolve the issue of foreign fighters. And the same goes for the dismantling of the chemical weapons program working with the OPCW. It also means ensuring the protection of all Syrians, regardless of their ethnic, religious belonging. The massacres which took place at the beginning of March in the coastal region resuscitated some fear and raised legitimate expectations about accountability, and the conclusions of the Commission of Inquiry will therefore be closely looked into, and the credibility of the authorities in Damascus is at stake. Above and beyond this, it is a genuine process of transitional justice that must be implemented so as to perpetrate those responsible for the crimes committed over the last decades and to bring Syrians together with the support of the UN, as I'll come back to. Restoring peace means also preserving the unity of Syria. The agreement in principle signed between Ahmad al-Sharaa and Mazloum Abdi on the 10th of March, and the first ways to put it in practice, the agreement on the Kurdish neighborhoods of Aleppo and the management of the Tigrin Dam are steps in the right direction. The success of the political transition also means the political reconstruction of Syria. We have seen some progress. A transitional government has been established, a national dialogue has been held, and the transitional constitutional declaration has been adopted. Efforts in terms of inclusivity must also be concrete over time and appear credible to the Syrians. And we therefore hope that the exercise of national dialogue will continue, and this will lead to free and transparent elections being held. The third point, Syria's economic recovery. Reconciliation and the return to peace will be strengthened by the economic recovery that will allow Syrians to get back to a normal life. It is therefore urgent that the Syrian authorities are able to restore the administrative capacities of the state as well as the Syrian economic fabric. Secondly, we welcome the work of the United Nations to support the success of the transition, and that is critical. In the political domain, the work undertaken by the Special Envoy and working with Syrian authorities to help to implement the major principles of Resolution 2254 has made it possible to establish a dialogue of trust with the transitional authorities. That is a foundation on which we must build. In the humanitarian domain, where the needs are immense, the UN's commitment is critical. The work, in particular when it comes to the UNHCR to facilitate the safe, dignified and voluntary return of Syrian refugees must be supported. In order for the UN's work to be effective, humanitarian actors need to have the means to carry out their work without any hindrances, and they must have the full support of all, and this includes financial support from the international community. Finally, we support the proposals of the UN mechanisms established to combat impunity in Syria to cooperate with the Syrian authorities. These institutions have the credibility to help with the implementation of this transitional justice, and I welcome the presence in this room of Madame Quintana on this matter. Thirdly, the international community has a role to play to help with the country's recovery. France has contributed to lift several European restrictive measures in key economic sectors such as transport and energy. We have proposed our full cooperation with the transitional authorities, notably in terms of transitional justice, to help facilitate the settlement of border disputes with Lebanon, for instance. On the 13th of February, we also encouraged a coordination movement between international financial institutions, the United Nations agencies, and the Syrian authorities. The goal is to support, as soon as possible, the reconstruction of the country and to meet the needs in terms of the country's recovery, notably in terms of health, support to Syrian agriculture, and access to education. It is finally, and this is critical, up to the neighboring countries of Syria to help it to become a hub for regional stability in the full respect for its territorial integrity. In this regard, we welcome the resumption of a constructive dialogue with Syria and several of its neighbors, notably Lebanon. President Macron has organized at the end of March a dialogue with the Lebanese president and the interim president of Syria in this regard. We call on Israel to stop its military activities in Syrian territory and to withdraw from the separation zone, which was established through the 1974 agreement. Syria and Israel must be mindful of each of their security concerns. This morning, the Syrian minister lifted the new flag of Syria at the UN. This gesture from the new Syrian authorities should be a sign for a new Syria to be rebuilt for the benefit of all Syrians, and I thank you for your attention. I now resume my role as president and